Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You are listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.
Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast. This is your host, Dr. Larry Widman, sometimes known as Doc in the Mindset World. I always tell people I love to do this podcast because I've been blessed over the last couple of decades to work with some of the best coaches, athletes, teams, and leaders throughout the country. And so I love to share what I've learned from them and what I teach them. But whenever I have a guest on, of course, spend most of our time learning from our guest. Today, I'm very lucky to have a coach on that I've known for a few years now. What can I tell you about him? I think he's just finished his 15th year as a softball coach at Papio La Vista in Nebraska. He's the director of softball operations at Nebraska Thunder. In his 15 years at Papio, he has 5 state championships and 5 runner-up championships. He had a 3-year stretch that culminated in October 16th of 2020, where he was on a 72-game win streak, his team, and they went 142-4. That class that graduated in the class of 2020-21. It's kind of a crazy ride this team had and the success that this coach has had. And so without further ado, I'm going to welcome Coach Todd Petersen to the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. You know, obviously, I always tell teams that my definition of maxing out is that given the talent, the experience of the athletes and the coaches, the depth, the health, and all the intangibles, can a team or an individual reach the limits of their capabilities? And then can they do it under pressure when it matters the most? Because I always say, if you can't do it when it matters, what's the point? Coach, when you hear that definition of maxing out, can you put into words through your life experience and the coaching experience how you define maxing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be easily be based off your results and things like that, but I think a lot of times it has a lot more to do with it, you know, in terms of through the process that you do during the season and, you know, and continuing to build through that so that when you get in those most crucial moments, you know, that they perform to the best of their ability, you know, and I've seen it where it happens and I've seen it where it didn't happen, you know, so it's not like it's just this easy thing. But, you know, I do think over time as with experience, you know, just not only just knowledge of the game, but I think it's more other things, you know, just things like, you know, your trust that you build with your players, the, you know, that overall process that you go through, I think that has a lot more to do with it in terms of when you get to that. You know, those critical parts of the season that you, at least you're confident and they're confident that they're going to do their best, you know, and again, sometimes it doesn't always turn out the way you want, but, you know, that's what we strive for, at least as part of that on the field.
Yeah, I love that. I always say our goal is to put a team in the position to max out. Like you said, sometimes you can do everything right. Life and sport are not always fair. Sometimes you fall short, but we get pretty good at knowing the difference when we put ourselves in a position. And so it'll be fun to talk about that, especially as we jump ahead after that season in which you finished a 72-game win streak and back-to-back state championships of 36-0. But before we get to that journey, I'm really curious for people who don't know you as well or don't know you. How about just tell us a little bit about your journey as a person and an athlete leading up to the time you started to coach?
Yeah. I got involved in sports as, you know, at a fairly young age. Grew up on a farm, but growing up, I played everything I could do. You know, and for me, it was just anything I could find that was sports related. You know, there wasn't a lot of sports on television, you know, like there is today. But for me, you know, like I learned how to play a lot of things by emulating people that I saw on TV, Bob Gibson as a pitcher, as an example, just things like that. And, gotten involved in Little League Baseball. And then obviously through my high school, I played, every sport I could, and, just loved sports and that type of thing. I was also a competitive table tennis player, believe it or not. So I traveled across the country and actually played for the U.S. team on the Pan American Games, and so I was, a high level player there. So it was it was an experience that I got growing up on a farm that none of my friends had. Just in terms of some of the diversity I saw, some of the things that I got to experience culturally and things like that. My first job coaching, I was still playing Legion baseball, so I was just out of high school, and I was a Little League baseball coach in Beamer, Nebraska. So I got my first experience coaching, young kids and being involved with that. And then from there, I coached Legion ball in my hometown, Wisner, Nebraska. And through that, I just learned a lot. I thought that I was an athlete, I knew what I was doing, so this should be easy, and I found out right away it was not that easy. There was lots of challenges. Some of it is just being a young person and just being maybe not as always, completely mature or whatever. Some of that just learning it from experience. And then had a couple opportunities actually to play in college in baseball and actually in track in two different schools. And I just decided to go to the University of Nebraska, and through that, I really took any coaching classes that I could find. I knew that that was what I wanted to do. I went into teaching, but my whole goal was to be a coach, all the time. And when I got out of college and went to Papillion La Vista High School, I was actually going to go to a couple offers at some small towns to be head basketball coach and go that route. And I was going to do that. And then for some reason, it took me to I'll call it the big city, because for me, that was the big city at the time. And I first started coaching baseball. I was an assistant baseball coach at Papillion La Vista back in the mid 80s, and did a lot of different things there. I coached junior high football, even though the one sport I didn't play in high school was football. I got to coach junior high football, so I got that opportunity. And then I actually became the boys cross country coach there for a few years. So that's how I got into it. And from there, I had a lot of different things that happened to bring me back to the softball side. But I'll stop there to see if that.
Yeah, it's just what I find is so fascinating is two things. The great coaches that I've been able to be around, which I include you one of those, like you would never be able to predict that you were going to be a softball coach, right? That was going to be it. Like Coach John Cook would have never imagined in a million years he's going to be a volleyball coach. Mm-hmm. And listening to that journey is always fascinating, because so many of us think we can plan our futures and we can control things. And most of us have no idea, where we're going to actually end up. Like you knew coaching, but it'd been really hard for you to say probably when you were playing multi-sports, and I'm going to be a female softball coach one day, right? And yet here we are. What I'm curious about, I've never had a coach tell me they grew up and one of their sports was table tennis, right? I'm really curious about what you learned from table tennis first that helped you understand the importance of mindset.
I think the biggest thing that I learned from that, and that being an individual sport, I was constantly in this self-talk thing. So I remember the first time you and I talking about self-talk, and it's one of the things that I talk with we talk with my athletes all the time, like what's your self-talk like and things like that. I think back to those days, and I had this ongoing conversation with myself all the time, because it's not that I didn't have friends and, that played and different things like that. And sometimes my parents were there, sometimes they weren't, but a lot of times I was, felt like I was on my own. And so my person was myself, like it was like my coach or whatever you call it. And so I can remember many times where, I was maybe having a lot of success and the things that I was saying to myself were really good. And then there was those days where, we've all had those days, and guess what? I was harder on myself than anybody. And it had a, real negative effect, honestly, on my performance and things like that. So that's the number one thing that I think of when I, think of those experiences and then taking them to, now in coaching and things like that with mindset.
Okay. I was just kind of curious because it is an individual sport. There is a lot of pressure. You don't have a teammate to help you, as we'll get into, like that notion that you could have a teammate or coach help you get out of your head. Like you're it, like, right?
Yeah.
It's your head, your
On
brain, and the inner chatter becomes even more important in that moment. So the coaching world, when did you figure out though that like, hey, I'm pretty good at this thing called coaching?
I don't know if I figured out I was pretty good at it, but I figured out really early that I was very passionate about it, because I was super competitive, which I think you have to have that to be a coach or, to be a good coach. But I also right away was, I liked helping people. I liked finding ways to motivate people. I think that myself not being an elite athlete. I mean, I was good at, really good at some things, and I played other sports where I was probably really average.
Mhm.
And so I think it was easy for me to understand and relate to, players or players on my team that are different levels. And I think sometimes people that are really good at everything, I think they maybe struggle with that. So I think that that's, part of what, but, overall, I think it's the passion that you have, because I've seen many coaches that have a lot of passion for what they do. I call them successful, whether, whatever their record is, because I can just tell, and I've seen the opposite. So it's just, I don't know. I guess that would be the word I would use.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So tie that into this other piece of what is your, what I call, what is your why? And I'm curious about what your why is today and if it's changed over the years or if has it remained relatively consistent.
Um, I think it's changed over the years. I mean, I think that I still struggle with the fact that many people define you based off your record. And I think I definitely did that early in my career. But really for me, my why is if I focus on the things that are important, like helping my athletes. Will my passion for what I do, will it rub off on my athletes? Will they, like feel the same passion for it as I do? Like we have a ton of pride in our Monarch softball program, and I believe that it differentiates ourselves somewhat because of that, and that our players feel that way. And so I think it's really what I try to strive to do, and being a highly competitive person, but really it's about building the relationships with them, and if that happens, they not only can have some success while they're playing for us, but also go on and be great citizens and have success as they go through their life or as they move on. So
I like that. So what I forgot to say, because I mean, again, you've had this long career at Papio. I already mentioned the success, but I really want to focus in on a 4-year period. All right. So,
okay.
what I didn't mention earlier, and it hit me when you said, we got something unique here. And one of the things of many that you have unique there is that there have been 30 state tournaments and you've been in all 30 of them, which is, and I remember the first time I came to your ballparks, because that's oftentimes where I would speak to your team.
Sure.
It's intimidating looking up at that board and seeing all those titles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the consistency of how many years in a row. There might have been 10 years in a row where they won state, but that it's so hard. Well, let me ask you this, in your opinion, is it harder to get to the top or stay at the top?
I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, I had to deal with, I've been in different situations, if that makes sense. I took over the program at Monarch Softball and it was incredibly successful already. And I think it was probably one of the highest personal pressure things that I put on myself ever is when I took over that program, because I was already passionate about the program because I had been, around it for the few years before that, and I was taking over. And right away, it was like in my mind, it's like, you don't win the state championship, you basically failed. And I had never been in a situation like that ever in my life. I don't care what I had done, even things where I was very successful. That just that's not ordinary in any way, shape, or form. And I went through some struggles. The first year we won it easy. The second year we got to the finals and we honestly I would call it upset. We were the favorite. And then the year after that, we had our worst finish ever at the state tournament. We won our first round and then lost the next two, which by many programs are, team standards, that's a pretty good season. And that was a tough time, man. And I think that was when I came to the realization, say, okay, this guy, the person before me was an outstanding coach and somebody I learned a lot from, through my time working with him. But you know what? I mean, Todd Petersen has to be Todd Petersen. He can't be whomever else, and I think I changed a lot in that respect because I started coaching or being the way that I am. And so, I mean, that was a big thing for me. So that was really difficult. If you were to ask me which one I'd rather do, I'd rather take a program that's on top because I like to win and I think we can continue to win. But I've also been in scenarios where I coached the Legion baseball team that won like 2 games a year before. And it was a challenge just to, let's just have some success, and it's funny how little things can mean that, as you go through a season or, and working with your athletes. So.
Yeah. So I call that growth through discomfort, right? You grew the most through that uncomfortable season that by most standards, like you said, I call that a first world problem. I kind of joke like most people would be happy with that. Can you identify, you hinted that you did change and decided to become more who you were. Was there 1 or 2 things that you decided to do differently that were more authentic to you that may not have happened as quick or at all had you not had that adversity?
Yeah, that's I would say one thing is maybe not take myself or not be so serious. I mean, I think I'm a person that I love to joke around with my players, with my coaches, and and I like to, or I think I've become pretty good at them knowing when it's time to work and when it's time to have fun or play. And you can have fun while you're working, but I think that was one of the things that I think I was way too uptight, not only from a practice perspective and then in games. And it got to where I was probably, even in coaching in a big moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. So I think I became a lot better at that. And I think through that, it's just saying not being so serious. I think it helped me develop my relationships with not only my players, but my coaches, and where I talked about the early life of table tennis where it was all me, I right away figured out how important my assistant coaches were. And building them trusting me, me trusting them, me being able to delegate and trust that they're going to do what we need to do, and so that, I don't know, that's the main thing I think of when you ask that question.
Yeah, I love that because a lot of times we tell teams, or I do, we got to get to trust or ultimate trust, but it's not just the players. Mm-hmm. It's the players and the coaches, but it's also the coaches and the coaches all have to be on the same page. And like you said, there's a process to that. And, if I had to guess, I don't know this for sure, but the outcome behavior that I'll bet you saw with your team is they played less tight and not as fearful in certain moments when you were calmer, not as uptight, and right as you modeled the behaviors better. Let's talk about this window of 2018 to 2021, because I think it illustrates some pretty cool points. But the 2018 season, I understand that you lost in the state finals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you articulate, did the loss in the state finals, did that help shape what was about to happen in the next 2 years? Did it have an impact on your team and you coming off of that tough defeat?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we went into that, the state tournament, obviously we were undefeated. And then there was some things with weather where just in terms of how the schedule went, and we were sitting on a Saturday morning, which normally the thing is over on Friday, but we were sitting on a Saturday morning, we had to get beat twice. And, there was probably, I don't know if there would be anybody in the softball community, and I don't even know if you could ask Lincoln Southwest, besides maybe their coach, I don't know how many of them actually thought even themselves, so we were in a very good position. And it just, it's just another lesson in just becoming overconfident somehow. Not even, sometimes not even knowing that you are. Mm-hmm. But, Jordy Ball will even say to this day that I remember talking to her pitching coach, and her pitching coach the night before said that he told me later, he says, I've never heard her sound like the way she sounded. And so somehow we got, and it's easy to do because we had a lot of success, but we had gotten to that point, and it's almost like the prize fighter that hasn't lost a fight, and they go into the ring in the first round, and the opponent, boom, hits them right in the nose. And it's like, we've seen it. They don't overcome that. Some do, but in that, a lot of times they don't. It's over. And that's exactly, it's amazing to say, when I look back on it, in those 2 games that we lost, in my mind was thinking it's like over when we're like in the middle of the first game, which is it's just hard to even admit, but but I can admit it now. And then for the next season, there is no doubt it motivated us. It motivated us. And we always been hard workers and things like that. But the gear that they took it to was just, and that was the coaches, the players, and everything. And it wasn't like we sat there and talked about it every day. Like, what, if you guys don't do this, we're going to lose again at the state. That just serves no purpose in my mind. Mm-hmm. But it was always there, it was more like, remember how that feels, but, move on and let's do what we have to do so that we don't have that feeling again. And the one thing I'll back up about that team and why I think it's a special group, I remember how I had many people tell me this, how, I always tell the girls the worst thing than being a poor loser is a poor winner, and then the fact, it was kind of along those lines. Obviously we had lost, but, you have to stand up there, you guys, clap for the other team, you congratulate the other team, when it's over, and probably the hardest time in their lives they've had to do that. They did that there, and it just shows a little bit about the character of these kids, and it obviously, as we went into the next year and the year after that, it carried over, that, and just the feeling that let's not have that feeling again. And, it can happen again, but, and so I think it made it a lot more fun as we went through it, because it was, there were days when I think we were a lot better than some of the teams we were playing. And I'll admit, even as a coach, it might've got a little bit boring in games, once in a while, but it was, taking it to that next level and, what we needed to do.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm sure you're going to talk about Secretariat sometime.
Oh, no, not Secretariat. Yes, we're going to get to that in about 1 minute. And It's such a great transition because I think the hardest thing to do in sport is to go undefeated and then win in the postseason, especially if you get punched. I always go back to Gonzaga a couple of years ago in men's basketball. I like their coach, and I'm like, I just do not like the fact they're undefeated. And
Right.
Baylor punched them in the mouth in the first 5 minutes, and they didn't know how to respond, and it was over. And
Yeah.
I love teams that that lose and learn
Yeah.
from it. It's hard, but so I also really appreciate teams that can run the table like your team did.
Mhm.
The next hardest thing after that, by far, whether you run the table undefeated or not, is to repeat. And any level of sport, for whatever reason, it's the hardest thing to do. NFL, NBA, NCAA, high school. You had a special group coming back in 2020. You knew it. You obviously had an elite pitcher, but you had an elite team. It wasn't just Jordy Ball.
Sure.
I mean, I had her on my podcast. It's not out yet, but her stats that I reviewed, her ERA was 0.10, etc. But it wasn't just her, it was the entire team, what their record was as a team. But that was the first year that you and I crossed paths. And I know you were worried about some things like that too, not like major issues, but being aware as a coach that it'd be so easy to get overconfident. It'd be so easy to get complacent.
Mhm.
And you and I started talking, and of course, we both figured out pretty quickly, being from Omaha, we're similar in age range. But boy, did we love a horse called Secretariat, right? And you had
Mhm.
started to talk to me about the Secretariat and be Secretariat. And I remember sending you a video. I want to play just a short clip from this documentary because I want to talk about Secretariat for people who don't know Secretariat. We're talking about one of the great horses of all time, and still holds records in all three Triple Crown races that are 50 years old this year. And then in the most devastating race, in the most important race in his career, the Belmont, which would win the Triple Crown, and no horse had won it in 25 years. Secretariat was trying to try to do that. I just want to have you watch this one little piece and put it into perspective. I want you to talk about it.
Nobody knew that that was going to happen. Not the rider, not the trainer, not the owner. I think probably not the horse.
Secretariat is widening now. He is moving like a tremendous machine. Secretariat by 12. Secretariat by 14 lengths on the turn.
And he still has a quarter of a mile to go. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going to totally collapse in the stretch. He can't keep this up. And I'm asking other guys who are on the track, what are you thinking? And everybody to a man is thinking, he's going too damn fast.
Secretariat is in a position that is impossible to catch. He's into the stretch. Secretariat leads his field by 18 lengths.
Lucian said to me, "Oh my God, Ron, just don't fall off. Don't fall off."
Finally, after I turned for home, my curiosity got the best of me. I had to turn around. When I look at it, I scare myself.
They're in the stretch. Secretariat has opened a 22-length lead. He is going to be the Triple Crown winner. Here comes Secretariat to the wire. An unbelievable, an amazing performance. He hits the finish 25 lengths in front.
What do you think?
It's just unbelievable. I mean, of course, I grew up around that time and I remember it. And, I think of some of the greatest sports moments ever and, for different reasons. I mean, that one is just like incredible in terms of just how, you not only win, you're the greatest, but then, you show that you're the greatest of all time. And it's just, and I don't know, it's a horse, but then you listen to these people talk about it. It's just, I don't know. It just gets me every time. And and when you and I were having these conversations about it, it was like, I don't remember how it started, exactly, but when we figured it out or started having the conversation, it was like we were, looking at that and looking at what the similarities could be like just to our softball team. How do you emulate that, or what do you do to get you to that? It's not only just being the greatest or being the best, but how do you take yourself so that you max yourself out? And I don't know. I still think about that to this day. Every time I I have a championship shirt and it's got the B Secretariat on the back, and I think of that. So
what I remember is we were trying to figure out that not only were their goal to win it all, that was obvious, but how are they going to be remembered? Are they going to be remembered like Secretariat? Because they did it the right way. You know, you weren't being disrespectful, but you were going to go out and dominate your opponent and not have to apologize for it. You did it the right way, like Secretariat. He went out there under pressure. He had a jockey, he had a trainer. So he also had a team Secretariat, that all had to prepare Secretariat to be at its best. And I remember having your team talk about the blinders and the blinkers that the horse wore, trying to remind them, you know, why does the horse wear them? So they can focus, block out the distractions. Because like you said, in some years, if you don't win it all, you're seen as a failure just because of the culture you set. In this particular year, they didn't just want to win it. They wanted to be known as a generational team, a generational time period. And then they sort of went out and did that, which was really cool. And so I really love that B Secretariat for you. It's actually helped several of my other teams who had a chance to what I call make generational history.
Yeah.
Be remembered not just as a team that won it at your school, but in 20 years, in 50 years, are they still going to remember that time period where they went 72-0 and did it the right way? So, any other thoughts about, just from you as you reflect back on that time period of obviously historical excellence on the field? Anything else stand out to you of that time period of 2018 to 20, that 3-year run that you had?
I think of just, I mean, you said like doing it the right way and some of those things. I mean, I just think that the leadership, if you want to call it that, from that team and that class, because it was a large senior class, and they were amazing players. I mean, they all but one went on, or all but two went on and played college softball. Another one went on and played, well, they're still playing college basketball. So just the athletic ability was there, but then just the way that they led the entire team and, set the tone for the future. I mean, things like, as little as you want to say, you get to practice, you get everything set up, you're the first ones there, you're the last ones to leave, everything gets put away, you're at a field somewhere that's not ours, and everything is cleaned up, just things like that. I mean, and I look at what we had a leader this year, Emmy Wills, on our team, that I think she sat her first 2 years, she didn't play hardly at all. And then she became all-state her junior and senior year. And I think that girl watched every move that those leaders made because, she was, we had 3 great captains, but she was one that, you almost just like you emulated all what they did. But and it was genuine too. It wasn't like she just made it up. But the things that those girls before them did, I think it if I was going to say, okay, what carries on, as we go down the years, it's those kinds of things, because I think it has a lot to do with your culture, about doing things the right way and, stuff like that, which, really has nothing to do with wins and losses. So, I mean, that's something that comes to mind.
Yeah. So for me, my favorite year of yours was not that year, even though it was really cool.
Right.
My favorite year was the next year.
Yep.
Because you talk about pressure and expectations of a class. Like you said, they lost every starter except for maybe one on the next year's team. You're coming into a 72-game win streak where the team's been unstoppable. And you have the pressure to try to stay a high-level achievers, although none of them have ever started before. I mean, it's not every year that you lose almost all your starters. It's usually so. That year is pretty, and I write about in my new book, it's Max Out Mindset for Volleyball. But in my book, I have a chapter called Making History for High School Teams, and Papio softball is one of the few teams that are in that list. And I write about the 21 team for a lot of reasons. And I'll start it by going, of course, they're the ones that quickly ended the win streak, right?
Yeah.
Somebody has to lose it. But more importantly than that, it's at some point of the season in early October, they were about 500, 10 and 10, 11 and 11, a record that Papio hadn't seen in some time, right?
Correct. Yep.
And talk to me before we get to the end part of that season, because there's a lot to learn from seasons like this. Talk to me about how you managed the first part of the season and how you were able to stay more process focused when your team's 500 and, questioning whether they're even good enough, like in their minds, like, especially when you have this unfair comparison to go against. Remember about the first half of that season.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a challenge. I remember the first game we played was we actually won that game. It was Millard North, and it was 19-14. And it's like, I remember the person from the World Herald coming up to me and saying, "You just gave up more runs than you gave up the entire season last season." He was joking, but I mean, I thought, oh yeah, you're right. And so there was a lot of challenges, in terms of just, really. I mean, I think the first thing you got to step back and just go, okay, this is where we are. And then really, like you said, the process and trying to focus on that and just going, okay, a little bit at a time, because if you just get little pieces of improvement, maybe there's an opportunity for us to get there, and there was a pressure, we didn't really ever talk about this, you got to make state. I mean, at that point it was 28 in a row or something. So that's a lot. I mean, you really don't even have to tell them that, it's kind of like the team before about losing the year before, kind of thing. So it's very similar that way. So you try to see the little wins, but I'll tell you what, it was getting very frustrating because there was points where I thought we were making progress, and then something would happen where it just, feel like you were going back to square one, and I always say we had a defining moment where we were in a game and we actually ended up losing the game, but we were down like 7-0, and we came back and got within one run and almost had it at the end, didn't quite get it. But I was like, in my mind, I said, "You girl, you're getting there. I can tell. You're playing together. You're improving each day, those kinds of things." And so it was almost like you kind of see the light of the end of the tunnel. But you know what? I mean, at that point, I thought maybe this is it, but you still don't know, right? And then, so there was a lot of that, and just not. I mean, I don't think we'd changed a lot of stuff. I mean, you had to do the things you do because I do think there's certain things that are important to us, playing at our best at the end. But it's different just in terms of what you had and what you're going to. And so then we finally hit that defining moment, I guess, and then things changed. So I don't know if it changed. I don't know. We slowly had gotten to where they were going to change. Mm-hmm. That's what happened. So
it didn't dramatically change from there. It's just the outcome started changing because we were that close, right? What I remember was your athletes buying into this notion that if each one of them could figure out how they could be 1% better for the team, whatever it was, whatever their role was, if they're going to be even bring more energy in the dugout, I'm going to work a little bit harder on my sleep. I'm going to work on, and I think they were able to buy into this process that we don't all have to do dramatically different. We just have to keep getting a little bit better. And if we add all those 1% together, it's going to be meaningful. And I think that's what's cool. So of course, your team makes a run and it makes the state championships. And I was at your field that day. And so of course I joke about, how you're not supposed to see a Cowboys don't cry, but there were emotions in you when you made state. And I'm just curious if you remember what that was like when you were out in the field talking to your team when you got to, the realization you guys made it.
Yeah, that was a cool moment. Because I mean, when you see that I think that, I think one of the reasons that some of this happened is that these kids cared, they're passionate about it. It's kind of talking about, I think they see that I'm passionate about it and their coaches are, and I think it rubs off, but I also think, they have that passion and then to see, after a lot of, difficulties they'd been through and just to see what happened at the end was just, I don't know. It was probably one of my favorite coaching moments, just because I was happy for them and they were the ones that had decided they were going to do it or, and we didn't know. I mean, we were at a point where it could have went either way very easily. And so I think it's kind of as a coach, you put your own pressure on yourself too, like we said, and it's different types of pressures each year. And I'm probably harder on myself than I should be, but it's probably part of why, I don't know, it's probably why I love it too.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, I think it just all came to a head for me. You know what I mean? It's like we had struggled and then we had some success, but we didn't know if we were going to have enough to meet our goals. And then, they were all great. They're all good kids too. And I think there was a few kids that weren't quite, I'll just say kind of totally bought in earlier in the season, and to see them buy in and you could tell that it was important to them. I think that was pretty cool. It was really emotional. So.
Yeah. One of the more joyful moments I've seen in sport. And like I said, I've been lucky enough to be around so many state national championships and state championship teams. And yet there's only a handful of memories that that you really remember. And that's one of my, top 5 or 6 memories of all time was the joy your team had and the emotions that you shared with them on a team that hadn't won a championship yet. They're going to state, and they ended, I think, third that year. But again, which is crazy that how hard it is to get there. And then, honestly, it was almost a repeat of the next year, different records, but and I always tell teams too, and I remember we talked about this, is that if you train your minds and you trust your preparation and you know how to pick each other up under stress, that even though a team might have beat you in the regular season, or the odds look poor, you got a huge chance to beat them in the postseason. And all I remember is you had to go on the road at districts.
Yes.
Beat a team, and you had to beat them twice and to make state this year for your 30th straight year, and you did that. Team didn't have as many challenges as the year before, but when it got to districts, it was even harder because the year before you were hosted. This time you had to go to a higher ranked team on the road. You beat them on their home field twice, and I saw the same thing play out. Honestly, it was just different situation, but the same growth, the same belief, the same we can do this in the postseason. We believe in the one and done. We can handle pressure better than the rest. Where does that ability for your team to handle pressure in the postseason come from? Why can they do it better than most other teams?
I mean, I think I'm not saying other teams don't do this, but I think it starts at day one. It starts when we have other things we do before we first get together in the summer with our morning workouts. But I mean, really, I would say at least at that point, it's like, okay, the season starts now, they're playing club ball and they're doing all these other things, but it's like, it's the first time when we're together regularly as this team, because as every team is different. You can have, you can even have the same players, 2 years in a row, but there's still differences between the team. And so I think that the biggest thing is for us is stressing that the season starts now. It starts on June 1st or whatever that day is. And we have our camp and we have our morning workouts. We have our weights and conditioning, things like that. And again, I think there's a lot of other programs, probably more as I've been in coaching, that do a lot of the same things. But I think we really start talking as a team and working as a team. And, we don't even know for sure who's on varsity per se. And then when you get to the season, it's kind of like when it actually starts practice, then it's like, okay, we have a process that we're going through, but it's like, this thing's a sprint now, Like if we haven't done a lot of the things in the summers, like fundamentals, getting stronger, getting quicker, just getting to know each other, it's not going to happen. You can't just go on August 8th or whatever the first day of practice is and just like turn it on like a light bulb. It's just not going to work that way. And so we feel like when we hit that point, we're like, it's almost like we're more like mid-season. That makes sense, in terms of the process. And so, then it's like we have in our mind like what, a plan for what we're going to do, when, and all that. And I think I've told you this before. One of the things that I think that, I've always been intrigued, if you will, about the mental side and the mind and things like that throughout my entire coaching career, way back to when I went to university and I took my first class with psychology of coaching, and the person teaching it was Glenn Potter, who was an assistant coach for John Wooden, believe it or not. And I remember just that. I remember back to learning that and, being in that class. But I think until I started meeting and talking with you and talking with your team, or our team, it was the first time I started having a plan about not just the physical side, but the mental side. You know what I mean? Like if you told me, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do on this date next year in a season, practice wise, I probably could almost recite it for you, right? Within reason. I never really had that on the mental side. I mean, we would do like different types of exercises and, here and there, but there wasn't really a plan or a specific purpose, what I'm saying, around it. And I think that has helped us as well, through at least it's helped me, and, understanding the team and getting to know the team better. Cause I think that's, huge, how long the connection and, some of that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I think.
So if you were to give a message or two to your younger self as a coach, which would be the same message you would be giving to young coaches today, what would it be? Advice, message to them?
Yeah, I mean, there'd be some things. I mean, the one that I talked about earlier, it said, be yourself, don't try to emulate. I mean, you emulate to a point, but you have to be hopefully you're a lifelong learner. I go to camps all the time. Just if I pick one thing up, great, or reinforce something I'm doing. Be yourself. Your style is your style. Don't because you can. I think there's all sorts of different styles, if you will, that can be successful. That doesn't mean you don't make adjustments. When I'm still can get pretty intense, and I do get intense, but I think some of the things I maybe did or said or whatever you want to call it, I would never do now. And I learned that over time from experience. So I think those are some of the things. I think it's, like I talked about, I did a lot of things that were individual sports. So I always thought it was on me. Like it's on me to do everything. If I don't, if we don't win, or if we don't do this or do that, it's all my fault, and, working with your assistants, working with your team, your team can give you a lot of feedback if you ask for it in the right way. And I think that there's nothing wrong with doing that. I think that even parent involvement has changed. Not that I love to talk about with the parents, but I think there are some of those relationships, if you will, that are important now that, maybe you just didn't deal with before. And I think it's, times have changed, but then the last part is just around the mental piece. I mean, I think about the pressures and the different things that young people have going on now compared to even when I was a kid. It's so different. I mean, social media, just, it's almost like that's a way how you, your self-worth is based off of that, which is just really sad. But I think there's those types of thoughts that are out there. And I think that, you really need to pay attention to your players, no matter where they are, if they're the best or they're not the best. It's, they're all people, and showing them that you care, but also, that you do. And looking out for their well-being, I think is so important. And I think that I tell our players that when you're at softball practice, the most important thing is softball. But in the scheme of things, it's not even probably in the top five, So when you leave here, and just make sure what are your priorities are the right ones. And I think that those can get, messed up a lot of times with young people. So
I agree with you. So there's some ingredients of elite leaders. I'm going to tell you which one I think, just for me, that I think you do the best. Well, there's a couple of them, but I want you to, so the ones I have are: what's your contribution to the problem, modeling behaviors, consistency, alignment of time and effort with what you value, having an open door policy, finding a healthy mixture of love and accountability, willingness to evolve and adapt, and building trust. The one that stands out to me with you, which maybe you may be surprised by this, but your ability to have a healthy mixture of love and accountability as an older male in a female sport is the one that I've watched that go, you do a really good job of that. Because like you said, you can be intense, and you can be, you're old school a bit, and you have high expectations.
Yep.
You do demand accountability for your team, but yet I always go back to the fact that somehow you can get this group, like you pointed, that's very different today than 20 years ago, to buy in to your message, to buy into your plan, and to share the emotions that you share. Like I saw these last few years with your team, and you can tell that they're in alignment with you. They're not like, whatever, coach is acting emotional today, but he's, we could care less because he's a jerk all year. And now but I just noticed that they're this group of athletes. You somehow have found that mixture. One, do you agree with that? And is there something else that you think you even do better?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I do that well. I mean, I think I do, because I don't know. It's funny you say that, the male coach and the old, in this case, the old male coach, and being able to relate to them. That can be difficult at times. And I always think that the time when I, decide it's time to retire is when I don't get that anymore, because I think that's when my passion will go away, or whatever you want to call it. And I think I've become a lot more, what would you call it? Having my emotions, not hiding them necessarily.
Being vulnerable.
Yeah, being vulnerable. You bet. Yep. Tell them I tell them I love them. I might have just gotten, a little bit upset with them, but, I might turn around and tell them I love them. And and I think I believe I do it. It's genuine, because I think if it's not genuine, they see that right away. And I think that that's part of what I do, but, again, that doesn't mean you can't make them accountable. And I think that's, one of the areas. I don't know. I have consistency down here. I definitely think that that's one thing that I've become way better at, being consistent, just all across the board, whether it's what we're doing through the process, how I treat them, how I, just how I am. That's definitely made me a better coach. And I think it made our teams better. So, yeah.
Love that. Consistency of emotions, right? Meaning we have our ups and downs in life, but they can't worry one day that it's happy coach, angry coach, humiliating coach. And at the same time, when we're consistent, we tend to model behaviors.
Yeah.
We want our team to be able to see that we are consistent. We are human. We are vulnerable. We can value both loving a person, but also be able to hold them accountable to a commitment level that we've set, or doing the right thing on and off the field. So I wasn't even to suggest that you only do good at one of them, but the one that stood out to me was not the one I would have expected when I was reviewing him, going,
right,
the best at it. And It's so hard today for a coach to have that mixture of love and accountability. It's even harder for an older male coach coaching a young female team to do it and do it well and do it at a high level. So, all right. So I have one last question for you on my mind. And the season hasn't started. We're months away. When that last ball is thrown in the 2023 season, define success for me, not knowing the outcome.
I call it like I feel good about what we did. That makes sense. It's in your mind or whatever, that you did everything you could to help them, to bring them along. That the players feel that way, your assistant coaches feel that way, because no matter what, I mean, every season has adversity. And, how a lot of times and that's not just adversity in terms of, wins and losses. There's different, had lots of different types of adversity that have happened. It's at the end of the season, dealing with that and other struggles and going, okay, however this ends up, we did our best. And, I'll be honest with you, the last 2 years, even though we have this streak that, is just crazy. I remember going into districts feeling that way. And so if it wouldn't have worked out, it's easy for me to say, but I think I'm pretty sure I'd have been okay with it. So that's what, I think it's going to happen sometime. So that day when it happens, I hope I have that same feeling when we went into it and said, okay, I know we did our best. And, if that's the case, then that's what I'll tell them. And I think they'll be upset or whatever, but they'll believe me, or they'll believe that as well. And so to me, that, that's really the ultimate success. And, so,
Yeah, I love that. I call that no regrets, right? You can still be disappointed, heartbroken at the end of the year, but when you reflect back, there's no regrets because you did what you said. All right, so I have one more question. One other thing stood out to me about your culture, and that is you also have some other very experienced assistant coaches that I see every year that are on the field when we do our meetings and or in the classroom. And it's always amazed me that in a world where there's so much turnover, that you have some coaches that have been with you for a long time. Tell me about what that means to you to have a coaching staff around you that's been with you a long time, and how does that give you a competitive advantage?
Yeah, it means a lot because we've had a few assistants that have been there a long time, and they're very loyal. I really believe that if I, walked away that one day or whatever, that it's in good hands because they care about it like I do. They're passionate about it like I do. They're lifelong learners, trying to learn and get better. The relationships they have with the kids are important. And there's that continuity. It's part of the consistency part. It's part of the, always being prepared, as you go into a practice or go into whatever we're doing. I will also say I've found over time, just the new people we bring on is really cool because sometimes it's amazing how a new person into a group can have some sort of, ideas or idea that you just didn't think about, and I think that that's really cool too. It gives, I love it having young coaches. I have a couple really young, pretty young coaches, and to try to help mentor them, but also just to, have them be engaged and to learn from them as well. And what do they think, some of them one of them's a former player, one of them isn't, and it's just, I just think that stuff is cool. And, we spend a lot of time together. We talk about all sorts of things. We don't always agree with each other, but the ones that have been there forever, they know what I'm like and I know what they're like. And we accept each other for what we are, but that doesn't mean we don't tell each other what we think or give our opinions and things like that. And we do try to, what do you call it? Change it up a little bit, because sometimes you get stuck doing the same thing all the time, the same role or whatever. We've done that where you change too. So I definitely think it's an advantage because they've been, the ones that have been there have been through the war. They've been through the competitive piece of it. And then you got the young people that are just I think, going to continue to make us better as as a team and a program.
Yeah, I love that you brought in the young people too, because you always have a lot around, and tells you a lot about how many want to be a part of this. So it's about the culture, right? Do you have any last thoughts? Anything that you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about, or anything else that that's on your mind?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's just, I appreciate you having me on. I think it was interesting to some of the things you asked about. It made me reflect back to my younger days, and I think coaching has allowed me to stay young. I tell my wife that it keeps me young, even though I'm old. But I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's just been just a great experience, and I wouldn't. Like you said at the beginning, how did your path become a softball coach? I mean, it honestly happened because my daughters got involved in it, and that's how it happened. And I loved coaching. And so it's just weird how your paths, where they go and why and all that. And I wouldn't change it for anything. And just thankful that I've had the opportunity to know so many young, nice, great young ladies, and so I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah, you definitely are. Your teams have been lucky. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Obviously, we chat here and there throughout the year. We have some things that we share passions about that we're interested in. And it's always fun working with you and your team, and the growth mindset that I see among everybody within your staff. And, it usually plays out the way it's supposed to on the field because of that. And like you said, at the end of the day, there's no question in my mind that you have this ability to get your teams to be in a position to max out when they matter the most. And you've given a lot of good advice to younger people today, because people love to hear the perfection stories, which is cool. But they also want to hear the struggle and how you work through it, or how you grew as a coach, because that's who the audience is young coaches and athletes usually, or even experienced coaches that are looking. And it's hard if you only hear perfection. They want to hear that part, but they want to hear the struggle and how we work through it. So I love that you balanced and able to talk about the perfection times, but even more importantly, your energy was spent on, what you learned from struggles and challenges that you may have had. So, and I hope that people have seen that your vulnerability shines through in a pretty spectacular way, honestly. So thank you, Coach, for being on the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you.
Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook, or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most.